Continuing the section on Solon in Plutarch's Lives, translated by John Dryden, revised by Arthur Hugh Clough. Some merchants have built great cities, as Proteus, the founder of Massilia, to whom the Gauls, near the Rhone, were much attacked. Some report also that Thales and Hippocrates, the mathematician, traded, and that Plato defrayed the charges of his travels by selling oil in Egypt. Solon's softness and profuseness, his popular rather than philosophical tone about pleasure in his poems, have been ascribed to his trading life. For, having suffered 1,000 dangers, it was natural they should be recompensed with some gratifications and enjoyments, but that he accounted himself rather poor than rich is evident from the lines. Some wicked men are rich, some good are poor. We will not change our virtue for their store. Virtue's a thing that none can take away, but money changes owners all the day. At first he used his poetry only in trifles, not for any serious purpose, but simply to pass away his idle hours. But afterwards he introduced moral sentences and state matters, which he did not to record them, merely as an historian, but to justify his own actions and sometimes to correct, chastise, and stir up the Athenians to noble performances. Some report that he designed to put his laws into heroic verse, and that they began thus: "We humbly beg a blessing on our laws from mighty Jove, and honor and applause." Now some people, if you're going to break up the names of the gods, some say that Yahweh is Jove, the right elbow here, the Jupiter sphere. In philosophy, as most of the wise men then, he chiefly esteemed the political part of morals in physics. He was very plain and antiquated, as appears by this: "It is the clouds that make the snow and hail, and thunder comes from lightning without veil. The sea is storming when the winds have blown, but it deals fairly when 'tis left alone." And indeed it is probable that at that time Thales alone had raised philosophy above mere practice into speculation, and the rest of the wise men were so called from prudence in political concerns. It is said that they had an interview at Delphi and another at Corinth by the procurement of Periander, who made a meeting for them and a supper. But the reputation was chiefly raised by sending the tripod to them all by their modest refusal, and the complacent yielding to one another. For as the story goes, some of the Coans, not the same as Cohen, the priest, different, Coans, fishing with a net, some strangers, Milesians, bought the draught at a venture. The net brought up a golden tripod, which they say Helen, at her return from Troy, upon the remembrance of an old prophecy, threw in there. Now the strangers at first contesting with the fishers about the tripod, and the cities espousing the quarrel so far as to engage themselves in a war, Apollo decided the controversy by commanding to present it to the wisest men, and first it was sent to Miletus, to Thales, the Coans frequently presenting him with that for which they fought against the whole body of the Milesians, but Thales declaring Bias the wiser person, it was sent to him from him to another, and so, going round them all, it came to Thales the second time, and at last being carried from Miletus to Thebes, was there dedicated to Apollo. Ismenius. Theophrastus writes that it was first presented to Bias at Priene, and next Thales at Miletus, and so through all it returned to Bias, and was afterwards sent to Delphi. This is the general report. Only some, instead of a tripod, say that this present was a cup sent by Croesus. Others a piece of plate that one Bethocles had left. It is stated that Anacharsis and Solon, and Solon and Thales were familiarly acquainted, and some had delivered parts of their discourse, for they say, Anacharsis, coming to Athens, knocked at Solon's door, and told him that, being a stranger, was come to be his guest, and contract a friendship with him. And Solon replying, it is better to make friends at home. Anacharsis replied, then you that are at home make friendship with me. Solon, I presume that's two omicrons, somewhat surprised at the readiness of the repartee, received from him kindly, and kept him some time with him, being already engaged in public business, and the compilation of his laws, which, when Anacharsis understood, he laughed at him, for imagining the dishonesty and covetousness of his countrymen could be restrained by written laws, which were like spider webs, and would catch, it is true, the weak and the poor, but easily be broken by the mighty and rich. Well, some from both would probably escape the thing. Consciousness is more important than any law. But to this, Solon rejoined that men keep their promises when neither side can get anything by the breaking of them, and he would so fit his laws to the citizens that all should understand it was more eligible to be just than to break the laws. But the event rather agreed with the conjecture of Anacharsis than Solon's hope. Anacharsis, being once at the assembly, expressed his wonder at the fact that in Greece wise men spoke and fools decided. Solon went, they say, to Thales at Miletus, and wondered that Thales took no care to get him a wife and children. To this Thales made to answer for the present, but a few days after procured a stranger to pretend that he had left Athens 10 days ago, and Solon inquiring what news there, the man, according to his instructions, replied, none but a young man's funeral, which the whole city attended, for he was the son, they said, of an honorable man, the most virtuous of the citizens, who was not then at home, but had been traveling a long time. Solon replied, what a miserable man is he! But what was his name? I have heard it, says the man, but have now forgotten it. Only there was a great talk of his wisdom and his justice. Thus Solon was drawn on by every answer, and his fears heightened, till at last, being extremely concerned, he mentioned his own name, and asked the stranger if that young man was called Solon's son, and the stranger assenting, he began to beat his head, and to do and say all that is usual with men in transports of grief. Well, self-abuse shouldn't be usual. But Thales took his hand, and with a smile said, these things, Solon, keep me from marriage and rearing children, which are too great for even your constancy to support. However, be not concerned at the report, for it is a fiction. This Hermippus relates from Pittacus, who boasted that he had Aesop's soul. However, it is irrational and poor-spirited not to seek conveniences for fear of losing them, for upon the same account we should not allow ourselves to like wealth, glory, or wisdom, since we may fear to be deprived of all these, nay, even virtue itself, than which there is no greater or more desirable possession, is often suspended by sickness or drugs. Now Thales, though unmarried, could not be free from solicitude, unless he likewise felt no care for his friends, his kinsmen, or his country. Yet we are told he adopted Cebesthus, his sister's son, for the soul having a principle of kindness in itself, and being born to love as well as perceive, think, or remember, inclines and fixes upon some stranger when a man has none of his own to embrace, and alien or illegitimate objects insinuate themselves into his affections, as into some estate that lacks lawful heirs, and with affection come anxiety and care, insomuch that you may see men that use the strongest language against the marriage bed and the fruit of it, when some servant's or concubine's child is sick or dies, almost killed with grief, and abjectly lamenting. Some have given way to shameful and desperate sorrow at the loss of a dog or horse. Others have borne the death of virtuous children without any extravagant or unbecoming grief, have passed the rest of their lives like men, and according to the principles of reason. It is not affection, it is weakness that brings men unarmed against fortune by reason into these endless pains and terrors, and they indeed have not even the present enjoyment of what they dote upon, the possibility of the future loss causing them continual pangs, tremors, and distresses. We must not provide against the loss of wealth by poverty, or of friends by refusing all acquaintance, or of children by having none, but by morality and reason. But of this too much. Now when the Athenians were tired with a tedious and difficult war that they conducted against the Megarians for the island Salamis, and made a law that it should be death for any man by writing or speaking to assert that the city ought to endeavor to recover it, Solon, vexed at the disgrace, and perceiving thousands of the youth wished for some day to begin, but did not dare to stir first for fear of the law, counterfeited a distraction. By his own family it was spread about the city that he was mad. Then he secretly composed some elegiac verses, like a funeral, and getting them by heart, that it might seem extempore, ran out into the marketplace with a cap upon his head, and the people, gathering about him, got the herald's stand, and sang that elegy, which begins thus: I am a herald, come from Salamis the fair, my news from thence my verses shall declare. The poem is called Salamis. It contains 100 verses, very elegantly written. When it had been sung, his friends commended it, and especially Pisistratus exhorted the citizens to obey his directions, insomuch that they recalled the law and renewed the war under Solon's conduct. And, well, typically when you hear of a eulogy, you're talking about, well, someone died. But the popular tale is that with Pisistratus he sailed to Culias, and finding the women According to the custom of the country there, sacrificing to Charis, he sent a trusty friend to Salamis, who should pretend himself a renegade, and advised them, if he desired to seize the chief Athenian women, to come with him at once to Callias. The Megarians presently sent off men in the vessel with him, and Solon, seeing it put off from the island, commanded the women to be gone, and some beardless youths, dressed in their clothes, their shoes and caps, and privately armed with daggers, to dance and play near the shore till the enemies had landed, and the vessel was in their power. Things being thus ordered, the Megarians were lured with their appearance, and coming into the shore, jumped out eager who should first seize a prize, so that not one of them escaped, and the Athenians set sail for the island and took it. Others say that it was not taken this way, but that he first received this oracle from Delphi. Those heroes that in fair Asopia rest, all buried with their faces to the west, go and appease with offerings of the best. Now, did the ancient Egyptians generally face the west because they thought that was the land of the dead? Oracle from Delphi, and that Solon, sailing by night to the island, sacrificed to the heroes. Our word church comes from the Scottish or whatever word kirk, which means a hero shrine. So Jesus being like the hero that they worship, that's definitely. Personally, I don't observe a church, you could say, but Periphemus and and Cacreus or Caicreus, and then taking 500 Athenian volunteers, a law having passed that those that took the island should be highest in the government, with a number of fisher boats and 130-oared ship anchored in a bay of Salamis that looks towards Nisaa, and the Megarians that were then in the island, hearing only an uncertain report, hurried to their arms and sent a ship to reconnoiter the enemies. This ship Solon took, and securing the Megarians, manned it with Athenians, and gave them orders to sail to the island with as much privacy as possible. Meantime he, with the other soldiers, marched against the Megarians by land, and whilst they were fighting, those from the ship took the city. And this narrative is confirmed by the following solemnity, that it was afterwards observed an Athenian ship used to sail silently at first to the island, then with noise and a great shout, one leapt out armed, and with a loud cry ran to the promontory Scuradium to meet those that approached upon the land. And just by there stands a temple which Solon dedicated to Mars, for he beat the Megarians, and as many as were not killed in the battle he sent away upon conditions. The Megarians, however, still contending, and both sides having received considerable losses, they chose the Spartans for arbitrators. Now many affirmed that Homer's authority did Solon a considerable kindness, and that, introducing a line into the catalogue of ships, when the matter was to be determined, he read the passage as follows: 12 ships from Salamis stout Ajax brought, and ranked his men where the Athenians fought. The Athenians, however, call this but an idle story, and report that Solon made it appear to the judges that Philautus and Eurysacus, the sons of Ajax, I don't think they have a J, so I don't know how you're supposed to say that, being made citizen, well, I mean the Greeks, in Latin you do, but being made citizens of Athens, gave them the island, and that one of them dwelt at Brauron in Attica, the other at Melite, and they have a township of Philaida, to which Pisistratus belonged, deriving its name from Philaeus. Solon took a farther argument against the Megarians from the dead bodies, which he said were not buried after their fashion, but according to the Athenian. For the Megarians turn the corpse to the east, the Athenians to the west, but hereas the Megarians denies this, and affirms that they likewise turn the body to the west, and also that the Athenians have a separate tomb for everybody, but the Megarians put 2 or 3 into one. However, some of Apollo's oracles, where he calls Salamis Ionian, made much for Solon. This matter was determined by 5 Spartans, Critolaidas, Amampharetus, Hapsakidas, Anaxilas, and Cleomenes. For this, Solon grew famed and powerful, but his advice in favor of defending the oracle at Delphi, to give aid, and to not suffer the Cyrhaans to profane it, but to maintain the honor of the entity, got him most repute among the Greeks. For upon his persuasion, the Amphictyons took the war, as among others Aristotle confirms in his enumeration of the victors at the Pythian Games, where he makes Solon the author of this council. Solon, however, was not general in that expedition, as Hermippus states, out of Evanthus the Samian. And in Greek we don't have a V, so Abanthus, I don't know how it's supposed to spell, but for Aeschines, the orator, says no such thing, and in the Delphian register, Alcmaeon, not Solon, is named as commander of the Athenians. Now the Calanian pollution had a long while disturbed the commonwealth, ever since the time when Megacles the Archon persuaded the conspirators with Cylon that took the sanctuary in Minerva's temple to come down and stand to a fair trial, and they, tying a thread to the image and holding one end of it, went down to the tribunal. But when they came to the temple of Theres, the thread broke of its own accord, upon which, as if the female entity had refused them protection, and were seized by Megacles and the other magistrates, as many as were without the temples were stoned. These that fled for sanctuary were butchered on the altar, and only those escaped who made the supplication to the wives of the magistrates. But they from that time were considered under pollution and regarded with hatred. The remainder of the faction of Solon grew strong again, and had continued quarrels with the family of Megacles. And now the quarrel being at its height, and the people divided, Solon, being in reputation, interposed with the chiefest of the Athenians, and by entreaty and admonition persuaded the polluted to submit to a trial and the decision of 300 noble citizens, and Maron of being their accuser. They were found guilty, and as many as were then alive were banished, and the bodies of the dead were dug up and scattered beyond the confines of the country. In the midst of these distractions, the Megarians, falling upon them, they lost Nisaa and Salamis again. Besides, the city was disturbed with superstitious fears and strange appearances, and the priests declared that the sacrifices intimated some villainies and pollutions that were to be expiated. Upon this they sent for Epimendes the Phastian from Crete, who was counted the seventh wise man by those that will not admit Periander into the number. He seems to have been thought a favorite of heaven, possessed of knowledge in all the supernatural and ritual parts of religion, and therefore the men of his age called him a new Creus, and son of a nymph called Balte. When he came to Athens and grew acquainted with Solon, he served him in many instances, and prepared the way for his legislation, and made them moderate in their forms of worship, and abated their mourning by ordering some of the sacrifices presently after the funeral, and taking off those severe and barbarous ceremonies which the women usually practice. But the greatest benefit was his purifying and sanctifying the city by certain proprietary and expiatory lustrations, and foundations of sacred buildings, by that means making them more submissive to justice and more inclined to harmony. It is reported that, looking upon Monachia and considering a long while, he said to those that stood by, "How blind is a man in future things! For did the Athenians foresee what mischief this would do to their city, they would even eat it with their own teeth to be rid of it." A similar anticipation is ascribed to Thales. They say he commanded his friends to bury him in an obscure and contemned quarter of the territory of Miletus, saying that it should some day be the marketplace of the Milesians. Epimenides, being much honored and receiving from the city rich offers of large gifts and privileges, requested but one branch of the sacred olive, and on that being granted returned. The Athenians, now the Cylonian sedition was over, and the polluted gone of the banishment, fell into their old quarrels about the government, there being as many different parties as there were diversities in the country. The hill quarter favored democracy, the plain oligarchy, and those that lived by the seaside stood for a mixed sort of government, and so hindered either of the other parties from prevailing. And the disparity of fortune between the rich and the poor at that time also reached its height, so that the city seemed to be in a truly dangerous condition, and no other means for freeing it from disturbances and settling it to be possible but a despotic power. All the people were indebted to the rich, and either they tilled their land for their creditors, paying them a sixth part of the increase, and were therefore called hectomori and thetis, or else they engaged their body for the debt, and might be seized and either sent into slavery at home or sold to strangers. Some, for no law forbade it, were forced to sell their children, or fly their country to avoid the cruelty of their creditors. But the most part and the bravest of them began to combine together and encourage one another to stand to it, to choose a leader, to liberate the condemned debtors, divide the land, and change the government. Hope for nowadays, right? Instead of these globalist banks and all that. But Judaism and most religions are claims to religion are very against this usury stuff. And I don't mean excessive interest. I mean, okay, you can adjust for inflation, but not, well, let's charge a percent profit. Help people out. Don't dig them deeper in the hole. Then the wisest of the Athenians, perceiving Solon was of all men the only one not implicated in the troubles, that he had not joined in the exactions of the rich, and was not involved in the necessities of the poor, pressed him to succor the commonwealth and compose the differences. Though Fannius, the Lesbian, affirms it's a place. It's not, that Solon, to save his country, put a trick upon both parties, and privately promised the poor a division of the lands, and the rich security for their debts. Solon, however, himself says that it was reluctantly at first that he engaged in state affairs, being afraid of the pride of one's party and the greediness of the other. He was chosen archon, however, after Philambratus, and empowered to be an arbitrator and lawgiver, the rich consenting because he was wealthy, the poor because he was honest. There was a saying of his current before the election that when things are even there never can be war, and this pleased both parties, the wealthy and the poor, the one conceiving him to mean when all have their fair proportion, the others when all are absolutely equal. Thus, there being great hopes on both sides, the chief men pressed Solon to take the government into his own hands, and when he was once settled, managed the business freely and according to his pleasure. And many of the commons, perceiving it would be difficult to change to be effected by law and reason, were willing to have one wise and just man over all affairs. Some say that Solon had the oracle from Apollo to take the mid-seat and be the vessel's guide. Many in Athens are upon your side. Now, if this wasn't the guest chair, I would get a chair that would I can sit right in. Take the mid-seat and be the vessel's guide. Many in Athens are upon your side. But chiefly his familiar friends chide him for disaffecting monarchy only because of the name, as if the virtue of the ruler could not make it a lawful form. Euboea had made this experiment when he chose Tanondas and Metellin, which had made Pittacus its prince, and this could not shake Solon's resolution, but as they say, he replied to his friends that it was true a tyranny was a very fair sport, but it had no way down from it, and in a copy of verses to Phocas he writes something that we'll get into next time, but Tynondas, Metylene,